Good afternoon. This is Jack Martin with InsureMark. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're going to dive in. David Grau is going to talk to us today about business valuation and succession planning. He's going to help us discover how much your business is worth and why you should care. We've got a pretty tight agenda. I just want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. There are handouts. If you'll notice over in your GoToWebinar toolbar, you can download those now. There will be an email that will hit your inbox tomorrow morning, and there will be a link for those handouts there as well. There's an ebook that David is offering, as well as a copy of his slide deck. So those are available for you to download, and they will also be in the email tomorrow. This is being recorded, and there will be a link to the recorded webinar also in the email that you'll receive tomorrow morning. If you've got any questions, again, on the GoToWebinar toolbar, that questions box is the place where you can type those in, and we'll get to as many of those as we can before we sign off this afternoon. If you find there's an issue with sound, typically the most common source of that is using your computer speakers. If you'll just disconnect those and then dial in using the number on your screen, you'll be able to get, I think, most audio issues resolved. And please, as you're wrapping up today, if you will take just a minute to complete our survey. It's 3 simple questions. It helps us plan content in the future and evaluate how to deliver content to you more effectively. So please take advantage of that survey to give us your feedback. We have David Grau today, and he's going to be doing his presentation on business valuation and succession planning. And when he wraps up, we'll have a few comments to explain a little bit how InsureMark fits into this and how we can be of service to you. And so I think for a lot of us, you might be asking, how did we get to this seminar topic? You know, it's not something that you hear that much from people like us or other folks in this space talking about business valuation. And I have to tell you honestly, where that comes from is some research that we did earlier this year. We asked advisors across the country, do you consider yourself an advisor who owns a business or a business owner who happens to be an advisor? And it was interesting to see the response because it really uncovered a blind spot. 74% of the people who answered the survey for us said that they consider themselves to be advisors who own a business. And so that accidental business ownership component led us to ask some follow-up questions. And we said, so with this business where you're the advisor and maybe the business is running you more than you'd like, are you counting on this business to be part of your retirement plan? An overwhelming 83% of the advisors we talked to said yes, that they did consider it to be an important part of their retirement plan. So then we asked the follow-up question. If you're going to step away from the business someday, if you're ultimately going to retire, and we assume most of you are, then shouldn't, and this is an important part of your retirement plan, wouldn't you advise your clients to get their arms around how to get out of the business and what the business is worth? And what we found was almost 2/3 of the advisors in our survey had not done anything in terms of succession planning. And more interestingly, 89% had done nothing with respect to appraisals. And so what that uncovered for us is the need to do more education, to provide more content, more service as an advisor development organization to provide that to our advisor clients. And so we invited David Grau to join us to talk about this subject today. And David, your team sent over this photo, which is kind of interesting. I imagine there's a story behind this.
Well, people always ask, for a picture to go along with our bio or description of the company, and they're never terribly descriptive on what kind of picture it is that they're asking for. So we do try to make sure, if you have to look at me, which, obviously good-looking guy, compelling, but I got to say, a group of puppies, tough to argue with.
Good point. Well, David is an MBA CEO of Succession Resource Group, and is recognized as the nation's leading consultant on advisor valuation, acquisition, and succession planning. So, David, I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. I appreciate it, Jack. So while the puppies are obviously, much cuter, and trust me, I years ago had a lot more hair than I do now, much like those dogs. The topic we're going to talk about today is one that I think I was excited to talk with Jack and InsureMark about because it's something that our industry just doesn't spend enough time on. And the survey results that Jack had shared, I think, are indicative of what we've seen across our entire industry. And it's funny because you all, my guess is, I've spoken to many of you, but not all of you, you are great practitioners. You love your craft. You love what you do, the role that you play with clients, whether it's on the advisory side, the insurance product, the risk-based side, some combination. You are good at what you do. And over time, as you are working in your craft, like so many of us do, you gain clients. And as you gain clients, well, eventually you can't bring in business and service the business, so you need to hire somebody. You hire somebody oftentimes part-time. Eventually you get busy enough, you hire your next person. And before you know it, you're running an adult daycare, and many times it feels like. So you go from being a practitioner, taking care of your clients, doing what you love, to just sort of by default ending up running a business. So what we're going to talk about today is taking a step back from the stuff you all do each and every day, working in your business, doing what you're great at, what you're trained at, what you've received credentials and licenses for. We're going to take a step back from the stuff you're great at and probably put you in a little bit of discomfort, because we're going to talk about your role as CEOs. And I don't care whether you have a $2 or $3 million annual revenue business or $200,000 or $300,000 revenue business. You are the respective CEOs of your enterprises, agnostic of size. And so we're going to treat you today like the business owners that you are, whether you entered into the world you're in and the job, the business you run, for the purpose of building a business that had value that you can transfer, or whether you just sort of happened into it by default because you're so darn good at what you do. So in many cases, our role at Succession Resource Group, and I'll put up just a little bit of background for you, is to act almost as sort of a catalytic consultant, where, yes, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, we do death and disability agreements and valuations, purchase and sales, deal structuring, mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of stuff we can help you with in terms of managing the value, the equity that you have in your business. But first and foremost is making sure we're all grounded in the same area, that you have a business. How saleable, how valuable it is, that's going to vary from each one of your practices to another. And you'll see I have it quite literally written out in one of my slides. I mean, from a valuation perspective, no two practices are created equal. The key is, I think, as a takeaway from our meeting today, what you're building has the potential to have value. And not a little bit of value. I mean, I'm talking in many cases for the clients that we've done valuations for. And in some cases, we've done valuations each year for a couple of years, and they've made adjustments. They've fine-tuned their business as we identify the key value drivers and detractors in their business. You go through that process, and all of a sudden, even if it isn't initially your biggest and most valuable asset, on a personal basis, compared to retirement accounts, real estate, I would tell you within a couple of years, most advisors, most agents, their business becomes their most valuable asset. But it doesn't happen by default. Some cases it does, but for most of us, it's going to take a little bit of time and effort, and that's what we want to share today. So I've got some stats throughout the presentation that I want to share on rules of thumb, trends, deal structuring, and tax structures for deals. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but as I share that data with you, this is simply wisdom of the crowd. And that's what you'll see on the right-hand side of my screen here is, sure, who we are, Succession Resource Group, or a boutique succession consulting firm. More specifically, the data set at the bottom there, this is just information from your peers, people who have done deals that we can then come back to the market each year and share with you what's happening for buying and selling businesses just like yours. So my guess is you all have either seen qualitatively in the work that you do with baby boomers, or quantitatively, read in some of the trade publications, the amount of baby boomers that are heading very, very rapidly towards retirement, and how prepared or unprepared they may or may not be. What's scary and compounding that is, a large segment of our population fits in that baby boomer category and is getting precariously close to retirement without a lot of planning work. What's scariest to me is how many of those baby boomers are small business owners. who don't have a plan, yet their business is one of their most valuable assets, or again, at least it has the potential to be. And we want to try to make sure that as you think about your business, that you, number one, think about it like a business, and you keep an eye on it, you track it from time to time, and you have it on your personal balance sheet. You think about it like something that could exist separate from you. And if you can approach it like a business, again, agnostic of size, you'll start to do things differently. So that's what we're going to focus on here initially. How's the market for practices? Understanding value. What are some of those key value drivers and detractors? And I'll run through a couple of quick examples of what could be done in a practice over the course of, I don't know, let's say 5 years. Keep things simple. If we knew that in 5 years you were planning to retire or you wanted to be able to retire, and you care about making sure that your business can live on beyond you, what are some things you could be doing? So I'll run through a couple of very specific examples, and then building on that same topic, assuming you have built something that has value, that is transferable, protecting what you built. Jack put the slide up with regards to the percentage of you respondents of the survey in terms of how many had a succession plan and that didn't. I would even bifurcate it further in the work that we do and separate succession from contingency or continuity planning. Whereas succession is something that we plan for, hopefully you're involved in, we have time to work on. The contingency planning is the what if. What if you get hit by a bus? What if you go out to lunch and you don't come back? What happens to your practice, your clients, if you have any staff? So we're going to touch on that one. We won't spend a lot of time there, but I do want to talk about protecting what you built. We'll talk about buying, again, for those of you that are on the growth side of the spectrum today or in the coming years. Acquisition is something that should at least be on your radar. There's a lot of, I think, consolidation coming in the industry, and not necessarily a bad thing, but there are currently a lot more buyers than there are sellers available. That will change. I don't know at what point, at some point in the next decade, but for now, it's very much a seller's market. For those of you interested in acquisition, and I've talked to a few of you already, you've struggled with this because while you like the idea of buying a book of business, it's hard to necessarily find one or a good one that you'd like to acquire. What I'll share with you are some strategies that we've seen be effective by your peers, and we call them our serial buyers, and we help them with deals every single year. And while so many are out there struggling to find deals, there are others that are wildly successful, and they grow organically, but they have growth through acquisition or merger as an inorganic strategy that they focus time and effort on. So we'll touch on that, and then we'll get to succession best practices because, again, whether you build something that has value and that is saleable is up to you. We'll try to help influence that or at least give you the tools to make the decision. But assuming that you build something that is transferable, that could live on beyond you and that has value, then we got to talk about succession. And it's two different sides of the same coin. When we talk about acquisition, that's the buy side. Succession is the sell side. So we're going to focus a little bit on the succession. What are the things that you could or should be doing to make sure your clients get taken care of someday as you slow down? Because that is the one thing. We're all in different locations. Frankly, we're even in different lines of business in our industry. But the one thing we've all got in common, you listening, Jack helping moderate and set this thing up, and us here at Succession Resource Group, we're all leaving the industry, folks, horizontally or vertically. Our goal is to make sure that if and when that happens to you, and it will, that A, you're involved in the decision, and B, you, your spouse, your state, your favorite charity, I don't care who, receives the value of what you spent so many years building. So a long setup. I'm going to dive in now in terms of the actual content, starting with a little bit of a market update. From our perspective, working with advisors and agents that are on the independent side, but across the country for years now, it's been interesting to watch this gradual shift. And it's what sets us up for today in talking about building something that has value. What you are building has shifted over the years. Where initially I look back 10, 15 years in our industry, and it was very much about production. It was about sales, generating new business, new leads, converting participants to clients, bringing on new business. It is always, in all businesses, it's the lifeblood of a business. But there's been a gradual shift in the tone of the industry, what people are building, shifting from individual solo producers to a business that has equity. It's a little nuanced, in terms of bifurcating these two, and nobody fits, neatly into one category or the other. But as you look at our industry and the work that we do as succession planning consultants, so much of it is predicated on having a solid foundation. There's nothing wrong with a practice versus a business. And when I use those two terms, sort of terms of art, but when we talk about a practice, we're really talking about sort of a solo producer or a siloed producer, that's part of a bigger cost-sharing, organization. Those structures you can see here in my illustration, the practice, it's not good or bad. Frankly, they can be terribly efficient in many cases. But they will start and stop with the owner, the founder. To the extent we can start to build a business or a team, that has processes and people involved, even if it's one person that's involved who's licensed, who you mentor and train, that qualifies in my description as a business. The ability to serve those clients in your absence, whether it was for 30 days, 90 days, or more permanently, what you have built could continue on beyond your 40 hours a week or 50 hours per week or 30 hours per week. So to the extent we can start to shift from a practice, an individual who writes business, to a business that has people who help support those efforts and that could continue on without you in your absence for some short period of time, the business is where you start to see the increasing value occurring. Practices can have value too, don't get me wrong. We handle plenty of practice sales. Where it's a solo practitioner who's been working for many, many years, good lifestyle practice, very profitable. You can still sell and get a good value. It then comes down to your revenue sources, is what you have built as far as a client base saleable. But as you shift into the business and the team, that's where you start to see the premiums paid. So my guess is listening and watching this, most of you would group yourselves in one category or the other. My main takeaway here is know what you are and know what you want to be. I wouldn't put a good or bad label on either one of these structures, trust me. I think Jack and I can both attest to. We've talked to plenty of businesses that make, for the owners, a lot less profit, and they have a lot more headaches than many of the lifestyle practices that we work with. So there's not a good or bad here, but it's understanding what you have, what you want to be. If you want to bring sons or daughters in the business, or you've got what you hope will be someday an amazing team that can succeed you, well, then you're going to likely head down the path of building a business that's going to have workflows and it's going to have more complications. And as long as you can go into it knowing what you want to get out of it on the back end, have a business plan, whether it's formal or informal, it'll make the rest of the work that you do or that we do with you in the way of valuing and succession planning a lot easier. So how are we doing as an industry? This should dovetail nicely with the survey that Jack started us off with. And this is just another one that was done a couple of years ago. And I think it's very topical because it hasn't changed in our industry. But this was a study that was done in 2012. And then again, 2 years later, to the same group of people, seeing how they were doing on their level of succession readiness. And you can see our biggest change, I'll highlight it for you, was in the number of professional planners who were planning to create a plan. I would lump that in with not planning. It's good to see that they're making progress, wanting to start that process. But in all reality, the number of professionals who had a plan that was ready to execute, that was ready to implement, needed refinement, you can see either a decrease or stayed relatively stagnant. We can do better as an industry. And that's the real key. Value is important, don't get me wrong, when you consider that for most of our clients, their business is one of their most valuable assets. But I think from an industry perspective, the work that you've put in, building your book of business, learning your craft over sometimes 10, 20, more often 20 or 30 years in our business before you retire, as an outside consultant's perspective, it's scary to think about you taking 30 years of acquired knowledge and expertise and not passing it on to the next generation. And I tell you, that is succession planning. When you look at succession planning at big firms, an IBM, a Google, an Apple, some of the tech companies, a GE, they deal with succession planning, but they deal with it in each of their respective departments, roles, because succession planning is about making sure that we can pass on more than just value in a client base and revenue, but what you've learned. So I'm remiss with respect to where we're at as an industry on succession planning, mainly because it's a scary proposition to think about so many of our amazing producers who have spent 20 or 30 years in the business, and so many of them retiring in the next 10 years with no one to pass that knowledge and set of experiences onto. Because the next generation is going to have to start all over. And that's scary. So Jack is going to queue up a poll question here. We're just curious, and we'll publish the results, obviously, so you can see where we're at as a group listening here today, relative to retirement. Is it 10 years out? Is it 12 months out? Or, all jokes aside, are you one of the many advisors that have told me you love what you do, couldn't see yourself doing anything else, and you plan to die at your desk? Because that's going to factor into the additional considerations, thoughts, strategies that you employ. Because if we talk about ways to build a more valuable business, but you want to retire in 12 to 18 months, well, that's probably not enough time. So let's maintain status quo. If we know we've got 5 to 10 years, you've got a lot of options on the table. Now it's a function of how hard do you want to work and what are you trying to accomplish. So the poll's open. If you take a second, I'm going to continue to share some additional data with you, and then Jack will publish the results so you can see where we're at as a group with this topic, and then you'll pick up with the rest of the slides here. Overall, a few other interesting stats from a market status update perspective, and that is, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of demand for these practices, for good practices, and for practices that have a lot of recurring revenue. And that's, fees, trails, 12B1s on the mutual funds, insurance renewals that are transferable, financial plans to the extent you do them every year. Those would all fall into that quote-unquote recurring bucket of money. The recurring revenue continues to see increasing values across our industry. And right now, for those recurring books of business, we're seeing something close to 4 offers per practice. 3.5 offers per practice was our stat. Let's call it 4. You can't have half an offer. So 4 offers for every seller. I mean, it's a crazy statistic in an industry where I think the average advisor agent, depending on the source you cite, there's a few of them you can look at, but the answer is consistently, average age is 55 to 57. So the idea that there'd be 4 offers on every single practice tells you just how much demand there still is for these businesses. Right now, 45 to 1 is our buyer to seller ratio. So if we have a practice contact us, and you can see we have a tab up on our website titled Sellers. And on the sellers page are sellers, people who are looking to retire and sell their business today. For each and every one of those practices that we have up there, 45 buyers for every seller is our average. More often than not, assuming it's not a terrible location, we can expect anywhere between 75 and 150 inquiries, hard inquiries from people who are very interested in talking to that seller about buying their practice. Now, again, you can juxtapose that 45 buyers for every seller to what I shared with you before, and that is 3.5 offers per practice. No, not all 45 of those interested buyers are quote-unquote qualified. They don't have the teams, the experience, the financing. They'd love to grow through acquisition, but they haven't done anything else beyond wanting to grow through acquisition. So there's a lot of people who are interested. There aren't as many who've taken the time to really refine their business, build their teams, build their workflows, and actually go out into the market and look to acquire 200 or 300 clients at a time. But there is a lot of demand for that kind of practice. And we'll talk about some of those buying strategies later. Industry values overall, I mentioned earlier the demand for that recurring side. When you look at industry values, I'll share with you on the next slide what the actual multiple of gross revenue, so this is top line, what the actual multiple on recurring versus non-recurring revenue looks like. But high level initially, what we're seeing right now is transactional value, the commission-based stuff, the one-time sale, trending down. And in many cases, the commission-based part of your business doesn't have much value. The recurring side has been strong over the last couple of years, only continues to increase in value. By what factor? Well, you'll see here, the poll results are up, so as soon as we have them down, you'll see the multiples for our industry, but I'll share with them now, and you can see them up on the screen. When you talk about the multiples, the rules of thumb for our industry, they tend to be grouped into one of two categories. You've got the recurring side of the ledger, which again, I put a little label down here at the bottom for you. Fees, trails, 12B1s, again, insurance renewals to the extent that they're transferable. All of that would fall into that recurring bucket. The recurring revenue has been selling for about 2.62, whereas the commission-based stuff, in many cases, buyers put almost no value on it. We're seeing right now an average of about 0.9, assuming that that commission-based stuff could be replicated at some point in the next 5 years. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. So as a simple estimation of value, now, of course, give you all sorts of caveats and asterisks on the statement, but as a simple place to start, if you've never valued the business, start by taking 2.62 times your last 12 months recurring revenue, and then add to it 0.9 times your last 12 months commission-based stuff. And those two numbers added together will at least give you an estimate of the average value. Now, again, that's like knowing the average price per square foot of residential real estate in the United States. Interesting, can be useful as a benchmark, but you'd never buy or sell a home based on it. You never want to buy or sell a business based on these multiples, but they are useful. And the reason why I say you'd never buy or sell a business based on these numbers, mainly because what you don't see here, the average is 2.62 on the recurring. The range of multiples, though, that number exists within, anywhere between 1.5 on the low side and 3.5 on the high side. So there's just a lot of variability in even just the rules of thumb for our industry. But these are averages, they are reliable, and you can see over the last 5 years, going back to 2013, trending up, but not a huge variation even back to 5 years ago when we were at a multiple of 2.39. So pretty consistent, I would say, on the recurring side. And we'll give you some predictions later, but I think at this point, we would expect to see that recurring multiple continue to trend upwards. What I put up on the screen for you here is just putting those multiples sort of in the context of what are the ways, how do you actually figure out the value of your practice? I mean, I just gave you the average multiples, the rules of thumb for our industry, but then I told you obviously you wouldn't want to buy or sell based on those. They're just a benchmark. Well, here are the other methods. How do you get to an exact number? Rules of thumb are useful, but going beyond that, you've got your traditional appraisal methods, which we would do for you here if you called us, or we can look at a combination of asset, income, and market-based. And those three things, and when we do an appraisal, or frankly, when anybody does an appraisal of your business, they're going to look at all three of those approaches. That takes a lot of time, both for you to gather the information and for a valuation expert like us to do the analysis. What we do more of is that market-based valuation, a CMA, comparative market analysis. It literally is much like real estate, where because we actually broker deals, we have transactions. We have transactions that, for the most part, will be very comparable to a business like yours. And so for the first time really ever in the last couple of years, with that kind of market intelligence, we have been able to develop a way to provide you a very accurate value, because it's based on what your peers are actually doing with buying and selling businesses just like yours. And when you do the market-based valuation, because we're just looking at the comparable sales method, we actually can do the valuation for, I think it works out to $1,400. So I bring that up not as a sales tool, but mainly to highlight for you, in the past, an appraisal would cost $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. You're never going to do that until you're ready to retire. You certainly wouldn't do it every single year, even though I think the information is very useful. You're not going to spend $40,000 a year every year to know what's driving the value or detracting from it. Our market-based valuation gets to effectively the same place for a lot less money, which finally allows you to see on an annual basis, cost effectively, what's helping or hurting the value. What could you be doing different or better? Or what should you be doing more of because it's working well already? So no two practices are the same. And at the end of the day, regardless of the methodology, whether we did the valuation, your local accountant does it, or you do it on the back of an envelope, I don't care. The core of valuation is my very bottom bullet there, and that is when you think about valuation, put the methodologies aside, the rules of thumb aside. Value is about an asset, your business, about an asset's ability to produce revenue into the future. And that's the question, and why people oftentimes on the buy side of a deal will say, well, why would I pay anything for this gentleman or this lady's commission-based income? Well, if they generated a one-time commission and they've never done it before, and we don't ever expect them to do it again, well, you're not wrong. But more often than not, even in a commission-based business, if you've been in business 20 years and you generate, $300,000 or $400,000 of commission business every year over that time frame, well, a reasonable person would conclude that next year, even without you here, your systems, your processes, your people, assuming that you got those things, it'll probably produce somewhere close to what it did last year. So that is, I think, an underlying theme when you talk about valuing businesses. It's easy to get hung up on methodologies or rules of thumb. Core of it is, can your business produce revenue next year without you? If it can, it has value. If it can't, it probably doesn't. So let's talk about ways to build value. And then we'll shift into protecting what you have built and some strategies there. Here's a couple examples. Number one, if we can, we'll just go from the left down and work our way to the right. On the far side, you'll see I've got these two bars. One in 2018, where your value is about $500,000, and the other, we're going to fast forward to 2023, fast forward 5 years. And watch as we make some adjustments. Let's say the recurring revenue in your practice today is 40%. We'd love it to be 100%, so it's all predictable, it's all recurring. But let's say in 5 years, we can ramp it up to 65%. Well, if the commission-based stuff is at a 1 times multiple effectively, or slightly below that, and the recurring is at 2.6 or even 2.5 conservatively, well, you can imagine what that does for the value of your business just by focusing on generating more fees, more trails, different lines of business, and growth rate. Now, if we can focus on increasing the growth in the business, that one seems obvious, but I would tell you, most of the practices that we help sell, you'll see they're actually going the opposite way. They were doing $750,000 a couple years ago, and now they're down to $500,000, and they'll chalk it up to, we haven't been doing marketing, had some clients pass away. Either way, if you step out of your current chair, your current office, and look at it from an outsider's perspective, if you're buying a business that's trending down or relatively flat, well, you're not going to pay a premium for it. So growth is an important consideration, and there's lots of different ways to generate it. Multi-generational clients and teaming, again, another easy way for a lot of the insurance producers that we work with. If they built up a book, they've got a list of 1,000 clients over the years. If they can team with a younger junior advisor who wants to work 40, 50 hours, will mine that book of business and share revenue with you. But now all of a sudden, again, we have more growth. We've had more contact with the clients than we've ever had before. And you're not necessarily having to do a lot of work. So there are a lot of instances where you can actually take a client base that is, in many cases, getting older. For an advisor, an agent who's 65 or 70, when they get close to retirement, a lot of times their clients are very similar in demographic. So to the extent that we can, a few years before retirement, start to do some of that multi-generational work with our clients, get the kids involved, it's not easy, but we can start to make some headway and increase the value. Revenue per client. If we can increase the revenue from, let's say you start out at $1,000 of revenue per client to $2,000, or 2 to 4, The key is, and this goes back to an old saying by Peter Drucker, amazing management consultant. If you haven't read his stuff, you should. He's been around for, 100 years, a long time. He's got a lot of good sayings. The one that I think is most appropriate here, where we talk about benchmarking, is what's measured improves. My guess is most of you listening today don't know how much money you make per client. Not a good or bad thing, but if you can be aware of it, you can begin to more actively control, influence, make changes. How do you increase your revenue per client? Well, easy way is, of course, try to focus on getting bigger clients. But if it was that easy, you would have already done it. I've seen a lot of people have success from a succession planning perspective doing a partial book sale. They take and they do some client segmentation with themselves, a coach, their accountant, I don't care who, and they divide their clients up into A, B, and C clients. And how you define those things is up to you. Profitability, revenue, those are usually factors. You sell your B and C clients, or depending on the amount of clients that you have, you may sell just your C clients. You think, well, why in the world would I sell my C clients? Well, you sell your C clients because most of the practices, most of the businesses, frankly, industry agnostic, have that Pareto's rule of 80-20. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the saying goes, in most cases, you'll see 80% of the revenue will come from 20% of the clients. Now, that may not be as big a ratio in your practice. You might be 60-40, but it's probably not what you think it is. So it's important to measure these things, keep an eye on them. And if you do have that Pareto's rule of 80-20 in your practice, you got 80% of the revenue coming from 20% of the clients, sell the bottom preponderance of your practice. Yes, revenue will go down slightly, but you'll make up for it on the back end with whoever buys the practice doing a revenue share or paying you to acquire that book of business. You'll receive it long-term capital gains versus the small amount of income you were receiving in ordinary income. So there's lots of different strategies here. The key is to make informed decisions. And by virtue of, in my example, I say we do a partial book sale, which frees us up to focus on additional client touches. Again, really, one of the questions that comes up is, what's most valuable in the businesses that you're building? Well, it's actually not revenue. I mean, revenue is important, don't get me wrong, but revenue is derivative of the relationship. The relationship is the most valuable thing that you have that you can transfer to the next generation. Client touches then become very, very important as you get closer to retirement, making sure your clients remember who you are. It seems obvious, but it gets overlooked in many cases. Last couple, branding. And we got Jack on the phone, marketing expert. Some of you listening, you'll have more experience with this than others, but our industry and professional service businesses in general are remiss to do good branding and development. It takes a lot of time and effort. So most of the businesses are personally branded. David Grau CFP will be the name of the business, or David Grau CHFC, whatever the designations are, that's the name of the business. It's what's on the letterhead, the business cards, maybe even a website. So to the extent we can focus in a 5-year example like I've shown you here on building a brand that is a little more disconnected from you. Because you're already the respective stars in your practice. You're the reason clients are there. Let's call a spade a spade. So in a personal service business where you're the star, you're the reason most of the clients are there and revenue comes in, everything we can do to try to build something that is a little bit more uncoupled from you that could continue on in your absence, like developing a brand, Succession Resource Group, and SureMark, being a couple examples. The current management, amazing as they are for our respective companies, over time will come and go. But the brand itself and that we've established in the community will continue on. Use of technology, workflows and systems being my last 2 examples. And I put these in here because, again, when you talk about succession planning, regardless of your revenue sources, and those are important, it's where we started our recommendations here, using technology to build your workflows, your systems, your processes, to build something that is replicatable, is scalable, where you really start to see some value being generated. Because now you've got something that, with those workflows and systems, we can start to cut you back from 40 hours a week to 30, to 20, but not have the business suffer as a result. That, to me, is succession planning. So that's my setup. on value, because this leads into buying, selling, protecting what you've built. I mean, that's all predicated on the idea that you have something or could have something that's saleable. So what's your time frame? I mean, that's the question, is when we talk about your time frame, transitioning your business, when in the world you would want to retire, that's going to be different for every one of you. And frankly, my guess is most of you don't have a date penciled in on your Outlook calendar when you want to retire. I'm talking more conceptual here. As a strategy, when would you want to be able to cut back? Stop working so much, be able to take, that world cruise, 3 months away from the business and not have to sweat it. Is that a year from now, 2 years? From a value building perspective and talking about some of the things that I just shared with you in the way of recommendations, if you want to retire in a year or two, you're probably best just to maintain status quo. Because the last thing you want to do is begin making a ton of changes to your business, be halfway through, and then be selling the business. That's just not good for anybody. It's a lot of work on your part, and you're not going to see the return, which isn't worth the investment. 3 to 5 years? At that point, if it's 3 to 5 years before you'd want to be able to retire, now you just have to ask yourself, how much work are you willing to do? I mean, you can get a tremendous value for your practice. It's going to be long-term capital gains. You can get a lot of cash up front. But depending on where you're at with your business, recurring revenue versus non-recurring, staff, systems, process, it could take a little bit of work. But if you're up to the task, my guess is your business can or will be your most valuable asset. But it'll take time. 5 years or more, start thinking about the concept of equity. I mean, just the underlying theme that, yeah, you have a book of business, yes, you have skills, and yes, they produce revenue that pays the bills. All very important checkboxes. But underlying that compensation you earn every month, every week, every quarter, every year, is the concept of equity. What you're building has value. And with more than 5 years, it's important just to plant that seed and to revisit it at least once a year. The idea that what you're building has value. How much value? Again, that's going to depend on the decisions you make, your staffing systems, processes, investment. I mean, you can very easily, over the next 10 years, end up with a business that still has no value. But I think by virtue of that old Peter Drucker saying, "What's measured improves." If you're thinking about the idea of what your build has or could have equity, you very likely will end up with something that has value. And the more you can engage in that process, think about it, talk about it, maybe value your business a couple of times along the way, your business could have tremendous value. Which leads us to then strategies to protect it, talking about contingency planning. So while I frame up contingency planning, Jack's going to put up, we have one more poll question that we wanted to put up, ask you, get your feedback on, and then again, same as last time, we'll publish the results, because I hope you'll find the results to be interesting. See where your peers are at on a very important and sensitive subject, retirement, selling the business. And most importantly, the question you'll see up on the screen, in your opinion, does your business have value? Is it saleable as it exists today? Goal, obviously, I think for most of us is, if you could have another large asset on your personal balance sheet, why not? But we're curious, as you exist today, do you think that your business has value to somebody aside from yourself? So while you answer those questions and we put the poll results up, I'm going to start talking about, assuming you said yes to the question, that your business has value, or even if you said no, but you plan to take proactive steps to build value, what can you do or what should you be doing to protect it? I'm going to move through this section relatively quickly, but I want to plant the seed on this because we deal with a spouse, we deal with sons and daughters, we deal with the broker-dealer sometimes calling us. We get calls from lots of people, and it happens almost once a week now, where something has happened to the lead advisor and they're no longer with us. I had one last week, got the call. It was with most of the business was on the IBD side. Small broker-dealer, good organization. The gentleman from home office had called me and let me know that one of their advisors had a stroke, unfortunately. Good news is he had put a contingency plan together with us the year before, By just sheer luck, he had done it the year before. Got the call, found out he had a stroke. We had another advisor step in to start servicing the clients in the interim. Just got the call on Monday of this week. The advisor passed away. Challenge was the advisor that he had named to help service the book temporarily wasn't a good fit, wasn't going to be the long-term buyer. So we are currently trying to find someone to step in and take that book of business over. Fortunately, it's in Southern California where this BD is based, so we should have a good shot at finding somebody. But if it was in Kansas or somewhere, there aren't any other advisors with that IBD, you would literally see the value of this advisor's book of business go up in smoke overnight just due to lack of planning. So let's talk about contingency planning ever so briefly. So I like to bifurcate the subject, succession versus contingency, just so we know what we're focusing on, because there are different solutions for each. The succession side is the plan transition. I'm talking about the unexpected stuff. Death, disability, loss of license, loss of registration. Stranger things have happened. And the key is to make sure that you have a plan. If you want to kick the can down the road on succession, I get it. You're business owners, you're busy doing what you're good at. The contingency is the one where you may not be there to influence the decisions. We need to plan in place ahead of time. What are we solving for? At the very least, death and disability. But even under disability, you all know from your respective work that you do, you got temporary, you have permanent, and then you have, at the bottom, some of the optional stuff, loss of license or even retirement that you could build into the plan. And the key is to have a turnkey solution for each of these. So who needs a plan? I tell you, every one of you listening today that wants to get value out of the business or thinks that there could be some value, put a plan in place. Even if you don't get value for the business, making sure your clients are taken care of by the right successor is an important step for you as their advisor, as their agent. Life insurance, you'll see my very last bullet there, is great, but it's not a plan. Life insurance is not going to take care of your clients when they have a question. We need somebody, another peer, to step up, fill that role. Who do you put a plan in place with? I'd say it could be anybody, but in general, it's a peer. I put up here, the most common choices we hear discussed: peer, partner, employee, or spouse. Spouses usually aren't active in the business, which doesn't make them a very good person to step in and buy your business, because this is an owner-operated business. You can't have passive owners without licensing. Employees can be good people to step into that role if they've ever run a business before. In most cases, great employees are just that. They're employees. They've never actually run a business. And to try to start doing that when you're suddenly gone can be challenging. If you have partners or peers, which one of you has peers, obviously, but if you have a peer in your area that runs a business similar to yours, that's your path of least resistance. So 5 relatively simple steps to getting this checked off on the to-do list. Number 1, value. Figure out, and I put that as number 1, because we need to figure out, is there value in your business? Assuming the answer is yes, and I hope the answer is for most of you, then we focus on putting together a plan, a strategy. Who would it be with? What would they do? Would they buy the business? Would they just service it temporarily? Then we can actually get this thing signed. We can communicate it to the clients, because that's an important step, and then make sure we review it at least once or twice over the course of the next couple of years. I've seen way too many of these plans that were executed between people who had best of intentions back in 2003 when they signed this thing, and they haven't seen or thought about it since then, and now something has happened, and clearly here we are now with advisors that were 55 when they put this plan in place, and now, well, they are a lot older than that, and the deceased advisor spouse or estate is talking to the supposed buyer who's the same age as the recently deceased advisor, and they have no interest in buying the business. Yeah, they know that there was an agreement they signed so many years ago, but they're in a different place now. So make sure you review the plan periodically. It's easy to forget, but that's my 5 steps. Figure out there's value, develop a plan, a strategy, commit, write it down, put it into a contract, tell the clients about it, and then make sure you review it. If you follow those steps, you will have some value that can be extracted. And I tell you, in many cases, if you follow those steps, It still is a less than desirable scenario where you pass away and we have to transition your business, but we can still get 70 or 80% of the value, which is pretty good. So last couple here is then practical. Create a contingency file. I mean, some of the easiest things have thwarted our efforts on getting value for the business. Nobody can get into the office because they don't know where the extra office key is. Can't get into any of the bank accounts or the filing cabinets, just some very basic things. The technical side is the agreement. We can share a lot of different resources and information when you're ready to tackle this subject. So that's all I'll share here. Key considerations to put a bow on this one is what we just talked about. Find the right person, put the plan in place, and then share that story. There's no better way to make sure your business can continue on in your absence than to make sure your clients know, hey, Jack and I put this plan together, no health issues currently, but if anything ever happens to me, Jack's my guy. He'll step in and take this thing over. That's an important part of the process. So let's talk about buying. We'll shift to the selling side, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Jack here quickly. On the buy side, just to touch on this component. Again, the slides are available to you in the right-hand side in that GoToWebinar sidebar in case you want to dig deeper into any of this subject. Acquisition should be on your radar as a growth strategy. We're in a graying industry that has been doing a scary amount of business, growing, taking care of their clients, and no succession planning. As you get closer and closer to retirement, those things don't align well from an industry perspective. So if you're interested in growing through acquisition, I tell you, I don't know if it'll be in the next 5 years or 10 years, could be sooner. There is going to be an increasing amount of advisors looking for a quick exit because they're ready to retire. They're going to want to get some value for their book of business, but they won't have done any planning. So there'll be great opportunities to pick up 50 clients, 100 clients, 200 clients that will effectively, if we can structure the deal right, pay for themselves. But you got to be ready. So what are the first steps? Figure out those workflows and those processes before you buy the business. Boy, there is no faster way to pressure test your systems than to find a great opportunity to acquire, buy it, and then try to figure out if you actually have those systems and process to handle 200 new households in the next 90 days. Try to get that stuff figured out ahead of time and figure out what you want to buy. As you see more and more opportunities cropping up for an acquisition, do you want to just do more of an economic acquisition where you acquire more clients, more revenue, like the business you're already in? And that'll be your easiest. You could look to acquire new lines of business. Maybe you want to get into the retirement plan business, or you've already started there and you want to expand it, or a new location. You know, maybe you are in Minnesota listening today and you think, boy, the summers are nice here, but the winters are terrible. And I'd love to acquire a business in Scottsdale or Palm Springs. If you know what it is you're looking to acquire, it narrows the scope and makes your job of finding an opportunity that much easier. So those are some of the first steps. And then it comes down to sourcing. And I put a few examples here at the bottom just so you have a list of what we've seen people be successful with. The key here is my very top first couple bullets is if you really are serious about trying to find a practice to acquire, they're out there. They're just not waving a white flag. You have to commit time and effort and do it consistently. Sadly, that's like all marketing. You know, we have to be consistent in our effort. It will yield results, but it requires, constant time and attention, and us redefining what a seller is. Again, so many of the people we talk to would love to buy a business, but they're out there talking to people hoping that someone's going to say, yeah, I'd love to sell my business to you. Let's sit down and have coffee. Most of the folks we're talking to, they don't see themselves as a seller, even though they're 65 and they don't want to work past the end of 2018. They still don't call themselves a seller, because what they really envision is somebody taking the business over and then hiring them back on for 2019, maybe 2020, on a real part-time basis, maybe as a rainmaker, and give me a revenue share if I can bring you in some new business. So they just don't call themselves a seller. They don't think of it as retiring, even though, again, let's be real, that's exactly what they're contemplating. Your retirement doesn't have to be sell the business, grow the ponytail, buy the Harley, and take off across the country. There's a lot of gray area in between. That's today's seller. So as you talk about finding those deals and closing them, financing is always going to be a component. Where in the world do you get the money to do these deals? Well, every deal is different, and there's a couple of different tools that I'm just going to run through in 10 or 15 seconds here just to show you what tools are in your toolbox and where people are getting the money. Where does the down payment come from? It varies in every deal. Sometimes it's 10% of the deal. Sometimes it's 20, 30. We've seen a lot of all-cash deals happening because of the bank financing. But you can see the sources of the capital: SBA lenders, home equity lines of credit, personal money is certainly a big component at 35%. The SBA comes in at a whopping 47%. And actually, it's been an increasingly used tool here as of late for our clients. But beyond the bank financing, you have just good old-fashioned seller financing that gets used in a lot of deals, where the seller agrees to let you pay them back over time on a promissory note or an earnout. The earnout being a very variable-based way to pay for a practice, where it's a percentage of revenue over time or until we hit a certain amount. So those are the ways that you can finance a deal, and there's lots of different combinations, which is why I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to touch on these are all tools in your toolbox currently, whether you're on the buy or sell side, so we can at least acknowledge what's there. Don't forget about the taxes. Again, I promise after lunch this afternoon, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about taxes, but this one gets overlooked a lot in a deal. You've got price, you've got terms, and you have the tax structure for your deal. What I've shown you on the screen here, this pie chart, is the average allocation. If you had 100% of a purchase price paid, how do they break it up for tax purposes? Well, 90% of the value is paid for your clients. Why do you care? Well, as you'll see here on the screen, you care mainly because it's long-term capital gains when you sell personal goodwill, i.e. client relationships. So if we can sell your business, get a 2.5 times multiple on the recurring, get it to you at a 15, maybe 20% tax rate, it's pretty good. It definitely is worth consideration when you think about your retirement plan and the timing. So as you're negotiating a deal, buy or sell side, don't forget about all three of those components. Everybody knows and talks about price. Most people talk about the deal terms. Very few talk about the taxes. And when you talk about buyers and sellers figuring out a deal or your succession plan, it's funny because both sides want the same thing. Both buyer and seller always want a fair deal. Yet somehow when I ask those two parties independently what they define as a fair deal, somehow in most cases they are worlds apart. So the key is with the deal terms that we touched on ever so briefly here: cash down, earnouts, promissory notes, how long you finance it, that combined with the tax structure and the price, there are an unlimited number of combinations. We have so many different levers, you can almost always create a win-win. You just need the right two people on the proverbial dance floor. So let's wrap with succession. This is the end of the career path and making sure you leave on your terms, and if you have built something that has value, that you can get the best value for what you built. Common pitfalls: people just don't understand the options, frankly. They generally have too short a runway. They'll call us and say, well, David, I think I built something that has a fair amount of value. We got good workflows, good systems, got $1 million in recurring revenue, plus or minus, varies a little bit from year to year, and I'd like to retire next month. I think, we were aligned perfectly until we got to that last bullet. You want to retire next month? And say, yeah, I got some health issues. It's time for me to move on. I can provide you the next 30 days, but after that, I'm retiring. That's my goal. I think, well, can we accomplish it? Yes. But now it falls into the fire sale category. If we had 12 to 18 months, if we had 18 to 36 months, now we are talking about some substantial value. So we have to have a long enough runway. And we use the analogy, of planes, and that's why I say runway. The bigger plane you build, the longer runway you're going to need. So a couple of choices. And this is why I think so many people are remiss to engage in succession planning early enough, because it's A, B, or C. A, you do have a good team and workflows. You sell the business internally and you give it away. Because what's the next generation? Your employees, what do they all have in common? They don't have any money. So I'm going to transition to them, then I'm not going to get a very good value. I could look external to one of my peers or competitors, knowing that they might be interested, but then I have to retire, and I'm not ready to retire quite yet. So I'll go with C. Do nothing, I'll die at my desk. We hear this answer the most frequently. Statistically, you're not going to die at your desk. Now, you may get close to retirement and not have a plan, because that was your strategy, but more often than not, you're not actually going to get drug out of your office. And even if you did, it's still nice to have an answer of who sits in that seat after you're gone. So there are more options than ever before. I can only scratch the surface in a presentation like this, but I'll put the menu of options that are commonly discussed. I put die at your desk at the bottom. I'm not going to say it isn't a strategy. It is. You could die at your desk if you're so inclined. But above that, you have all the way up to internal incremental sales, where you sell 5 or 10% of your company to the next generation. And then everything in between as different examples. We can talk about each one of these with you in more detail. This isn't the forum to necessarily do it. The key is you've got a lot of options if you have time. So that's what I want to make sure we focus on, is just understanding you have different options, you have different strategies. And depending on your preference, your goals, your timeline, you can get a lot of value or no value. If you don't have a succession plan, this is what I want to put things to a close with and hand it back over to Jack. You are going to work less. We talked about it early on. We're all going to retire at some point from this industry. So over time, whether it's at age 65 in my example or heading towards 70, earlier or later for you, it's going to happen. And this is an advisor, agent with no plan. Even a recurring revenue stream will be closely correlated with the time you spend. You take Fridays and Mondays off, half days on Wednesdays. Over time, not right away, but over time, the revenue will follow suit. It'll begin to decline. Expenses have a funny way of just going up over time. It's just the nature of the exercise. And then you compound it with the age of your clients. And let's take a snapshot here, age 55, pretty even bell curve, on the client base. But if we fast forward 10 years, an advisor with no succession plan, so we don't have a good internal team to take over. At age 65, or 10 years later, we're working less. Revenues maybe started to decline a little bit. The clients are now all 10 years older, because now at age 65, your batting average closing those hungry young executives that are age 40 and 50, probably that batting average started to erode a little bit. You're not closing as much. So the clients are just getting older, like our advisor. The value of the business drops off precipitously because, of course, the age of the clients, where that is our most valuable asset. If you're working less, we're not growing, the clients are getting older, and revenue is declining, all of a sudden, what was our most valuable asset becomes our least valuable asset very, very quickly. My point here is not to try to figure out where we should have pulled the proverbial ripcord, because it's clear it's somewhere in sort of the mid-60s, but that's the nature of a peak. You never know you've peaked until you look back on it and can see it. You can never see this stuff coming. Main point here is succession planning as a concept, the core of it. I don't even care about how much value you get out of the business. It's more about the other dotted line. You have a book of business, you have clients. As you cut back and work less, which you have every right to do as you get closer to retirement, who picks up the slack? Who picks up the extra time? That could be a successor, somebody you have internal to your organization, who you've trained or will continue to train with your reduced hours. It could be a peer. Maybe it's a peer that you merge with. Maybe it's a peer you just decide in your twilight years to share office space with and work alongside so they can back you up. The key is to have an answer to your client's question before they ask it. How much longer are you going to be doing this? Because if it hasn't come up, you know it will. And your clients, honestly, are our best salespeople. We have a good business development team. They'll call and talk to you from time to time, answer your questions. What motivates more advisors, more agents than any amount of work that we could do is your clients asking that very uncomfortable question and you not having an answer. Then we begin the process of developing one. So consider your options. If you want to build a business and sell it internally, give yourself time. Know how much time and effort it's going to take. And if you're not up to the task, or you just don't want to go down that path, or you don't have the people, then think about an external sale or a merger. And know that even if you aren't sure when you want to retire, knowing that at some point you will retire, who might take it over? The key is just to have an answer to some of these questions and to start thinking about it. Because you look at 2019, 2020, and you fast forward 10 years, there's going to be a lot of advisors who are exiting our industry. And I promise you, most of them, none of you listening today, but most of them will not have an exit strategy. The good news is the concept of succession building value is something that the industry is starting to talk about more. I don't want to say InsureMark is bleeding edge, but I think Jack would agree, and he mentioned it at the beginning of this presentation as I hand it back over to him. This is a subject that does not get talked about nearly enough, mainly because you are advisors first, business owners second. The key is I would call those 1A and 1B. You are both at the same time. We can't help you as an advisor. We can help you as a business owner to build something that has lasting and enduring value. And frankly, we just want to try to help you put what could be your most valuable asset onto your personal balance sheet. And I don't mean that figuratively. I mean that quite literally. So takeaways, understand what those key value business drivers and detractors are. I touched on a couple examples. You'll see Jack had mentioned one of the downloadables. We have an ebook here that touches on some of those same things and a few others. The key is to understand those drivers and detractors and have time to do something about it. Engage that process annually. Whether you do evaluation with us each year or not, think about it annually. And I'm sure InsureMark's going to try to do everything that they can to keep this topic top of mind, knowing that you are busy business professionals. But those are my recommendations, is just consider the topic of equity. Knowing what you're building has value or has the potential to have tremendous value with a little bit of concerted time and effort. So with that, I put my contact information up here in case you want to talk offline one-on-one. I'm going to hand it back over to Jack to put a bow on this thing and handle any questions. Jack?
Great job, David. And folks, like I said, we're going to wrap this up real quickly. Where we started this was the notion of accidental business owners, and I think, David, you did an awesome job of explaining, where the value comes from in your business, and focus on building that asset that's going to produce future income. And so I guess the next question is, so how do we do that? And that's really where InsureMark comes into play, because we're really positioned to help our advisor clients drive that value, and we do that through a process. As an advisor development organization, we are focused on helping our clients increase the value of their business, but also achieving that balance between their life's work, and we call that driving business alpha. We do that by optimizing the value of your business through a value engineering process, and I know that sounds like a complicated deal, but it's really not. And at the end of the day, if you've gone through that process with us, what you get is a blueprint or an action plan that's going to show you how to optimize that value. So like you do with your clients, we're going to start with discovery. We're going to ask a lot of questions about your business, what's working, what's not, where would you like to be in 5 years, what would you like to do with respect to getting out of your business, and what are the metrics in your business. Then we're going to take you through a systematic process that's going to look at your lead generation, look at practice betterment, the client experience. We're going to look at your communication programs, and finally the brand development and marketing. As we look at all those pieces systematically, then we come out with a blueprint. And so this is an articulated action plan that becomes the basis for continuous improvement, because you're going to be working with an advisor development consultant who's going to know you better than anyone has ever known your business before, who's going to be engaged with you to help you not only execute on this plan, but to refine it over time so that it is constantly evolving and moving towards those goals that you've laid out. The research is clear that when advisors work through this process with us, their business is more valuable and they earn more revenue. Our top advisor from last year put it this way: this blueprinting process is simply great business planning. And so I'll leave you with that thought. If you'd like to talk about business alpha, value engineering, if you'd like to talk about how to approach those drivers of value that David laid out for you, give us a call at 800-752-0207. Please follow us on LinkedIn. That's the best way for you to stay in touch with the events and news that we'll have to offer. Having said all that, David, again, great job. Folks, I appreciate you staying on with us this afternoon. It's been a fabulous webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next month on our Business Alpha webinar series. Thanks, and have a great day.